You think you left your past behind. You think you outgrew the scars, the silence, the smallness forced onto you. But that's the first lie childhood teaches. That time alone sets you free. It doesn't. Not for you. Not for anyone. Most people walk into adulthood with a child still gripping their spine. A frightened child. A conditioned child. A controlled child. A version of you that learned to survive by shrinking and still demands you stay small. That's why you hesitate before speaking. Why you second-guess your instincts. Why you seek approval you don't need. Why power feels dangerous, like a forbidden room you were told not to touch. Those reflexes aren't yours. They are ghosts. Invisible hands still steering your behavior long after the people who shaped you have disappeared. And here's the part that should chill you. Your enemies see the child in you before you do. They see the fear in your eyes, the softness in your posture, the doubt behind your decisions. They study the cracks you pretend aren't there. But this video, this moment, is the fracture point. The place where the old programming dies. Because what comes next on Machiavelli's psyche is not comfort. It's not healing. It's not softness. It is a dismantling. A stripping away of the illusions you inherited, until only the cold, sovereign version of you remains. The one who obeys no past and fears no memory. Before you move forward, comment this phrase to mark the burial of your old self. My childhood no longer commands me. Take a breath. You need to understand something brutal. The mind you're living with today was engineered in an environment where you had no power. Childhood conditioning is not sentimental, it is structural. It builds the blueprint of how you interpret threat, loyalty, rejection, authority, and desire. And unless you consciously rewrite that blueprint, your adult life becomes nothing more than an upgraded version of your childhood prison. Every reaction you have, every moment of hesitation, every surge of anger, every instinct to run or please or hide is a psychological fossil, a survival pattern forged in a world where you were too small to fight back. But now you're grown, and these outdated responses don't protect you. They sabotage you with surgical precision. Dark psychology shows that early experiences anchor themselves in the unconscious, shaping the way you deal with power and vulnerability without ever revealing their influence. This is why a single tone of voice can make your chest tighten. This is why confrontation feels dangerous, even when you know you're right. This is why you fear disappointing people who have no real authority over you. The past is not behind you. It sits inside you like an uninvited king. Machiavelli understood that the man who fails to master his internal world is already conquered. What controls your childhood self controls your decisions. What controls your decisions controls your life. The world sees the cracks in you long before you see them yourself, because your body speaks the language of your past even when your words don't. Your posture reveals your conditioning. Your eyes reveal your self-worth. Your reactions reveal your hidden hierarchy of fear. The dangerous truth is that the child in you still negotiates with life instead of commanding it. You learned to avoid conflict because the cost of conflict as a child was too high. You learned to be silent because silence felt safer than truth. You learned to chase approval because love was conditional, fragile, unpredictable. And now as an adult, you repeat these same patterns, mistaking them for personality traits when they're actually outdated survival tactics. To break free, you must first expose the architecture of your conditioning with ruthless clarity. Every time you hesitate to speak, ask yourself whose voice you're still afraid of. Every time you shrink yourself for the comfort of others, ask yourself who taught you that your full presence was dangerous. Every time you blame yourself for things outside your control, ask yourself who trained you to carry burdens that were never yours. This is not self-help. This is psychological warfare, an internal coup designed to dethrone the ghost of the child you once were. And the moment you see these patterns for what they truly are, you gain the power to rewrite them. Awareness is the blade, choice is the strike, transformation is the kill. Most people never realize how deeply their early environment trained them to misread power. Childhood shapes the way you interpret every social situation, every threat, every opportunity, and the tragedy is that you keep responding to the world with instincts built for a battlefield that no longer exists. When you were young, you learned quickly who held the power and who didn't. Maybe it was the parent who yelled first. Maybe it was the sibling who mocked you. Maybe it was the silence of disappointment, the tension in the room, the unpredictable storm of someone else's emotions. Whatever it was, your nervous system recorded it like scripture. And now, decades later, you still enter rooms scanning for danger, analyzing tone, bracing for impact. You call this vigilance, humility, or sensitivity, but in dark psychology, it has a different name: inherited fear conditioning. Real power demands that you confront this conditioning without mercy. The version of you shaped by childhood reacts automatically, without thinking, because that child believes the stakes are still life or death. The adult version of you must intervene long before those automatic reactions become decisions. When someone challenges you, your childhood might tell you to retreat, because confrontation once meant punishment. But now, retreating only teaches the world that you're easy to move. When someone disrespects you, your childhood might tell you to stay quiet, because silence once kept you safe. But silence now becomes consent. When someone withholds approval, your childhood might tell you to earn it because affection was once conditional. But chasing approval now only signals weakness. The modern world rewards those who rewrite their conditioning, not those who remain loyal to it. This is why Machiavellian strategy begins inside the mind, not outside. Before you can master politics, relationships, or ambition, you must master the inner child, who still reacts like a cornered animal. You must become emotionally self-governing. Cold clarity replaces fear. Detached reasoning replaces emotional reflex. Strategic dominance replaces inherited submission. The man who understands his early programming is the man who cannot be manipulated by it. And when the world can no longer manipulate your triggers, you become dangerously unpredictable, in the way powerful men are unpredictable, not unstable men. Psychology shows that the unconscious mind is always negotiating safety. What you think is overthinking is actually your childhood wounds calculating how to avoid repeating old pain. What you think is low confidence is actually a learned belief that your presence once created conflict. What you think is kindness is often a survival tactic you've mistaken for virtue. True strength begins the moment you separate who you were forced to be from who you choose to become. You must strip your reactions down to the bone and ask, is this me or is this conditioning? Is this instinct mine or was it implanted? Every honest answer weakens the grip of the old identity. Every moment of awareness fractures another chain. The most dangerous truth of your life is this: you did not build your identity. It was constructed for you, piece by piece, by the emotional climate you grew up in. What you call personality is often nothing more than trauma patterns wearing mature clothing. What you call your nature is usually just the safest version of yourself you learn to perform. And the reason this matters is because identity is destiny. If your identity was formed under fear, your destiny will be limited by fear. If your identity was shaped by caretakers who demanded silence, your destiny will be defined by hesitation. If your identity was built on the belief that your value depends on pleasing others, then power will always feel like a forbidden luxury. This is why understanding the psychology of childhood is not therapy. It is strategy. A man who knows the origins of his behavior can choose which parts to kill and which parts to cultivate. A man who refuses to examine his origins becomes predictable, manipulable, and weak. Cold analysis reveals how early emotional environments program the nervous system to expect certain outcomes. If you grew up being punished for taking initiative, your body now registers ambition as danger. If you grew up never being truly heard, you unconsciously assume your voice carries no weight. If you grew up around unstable authority, you now treat every confrontation as a potential disaster. This is not incompetence, it is conditioning. But conditioning becomes a curse the moment you mistake it for identity. Machiavelli would tell you that a ruler who cannot understand the forces shaping him is unfit to rule others. The The same applies internally. You cannot rule your life until you dethrone the psychological architects who built your first identity. High-level psychology shows that the unconscious mind stores emotional rules rather than memories. These rules become the operating system behind your choices, reactions, relationships, ambitions, and fears. You think you fear failure, but what you truly fear is disappointing the ghosts of people who no longer matter. You think you want love, but what you truly crave is validation from the same type of caretakers who neglected you. You think you avoid conflict because you're peaceful, but the truth is, you were trained to anticipate punishment. The adult world will not tell you this. Most people walk around obeying childhood rules they never questioned. Breaking these rules requires a level of self-honesty that feels like violence. But violence against illusion is the beginning of personal sovereignty. To become untouchable, you must become emotionally self-authored. You rewrite the rules that were installed in you before you had a voice. You reject the belief that you must shrink to be safe. You reject the belief that staying silent keeps the peace. You reject the belief that your worth is dependent on anyone's approval. You reconstruct your identity not as a reaction to fear, but as an expression of power. This is the psychological metamorphosis most men never achieve. But you are here because you're ready to strip your identity down to the raw wires and rebuild it from cold intention rather than childhood conditioning. Comment this phrase to prove you're stepping into authorship. I choose my identity now. There is a truth most men never uncover because it terrifies them. Your emotional triggers are not reactions. They are commands issued by a past version of you. Every time your heart rate spikes in confrontation, every time you feel the sudden urge to apologize, every time you shut down, overthink, or retreat, you are not acting as a sovereign adult. You are obeying a script written in a childhood moment where you felt powerless. This is why dark psychology places such importance on emotional triggers. They expose the exact points where you are still ruled, not by logic, but by memory. And until you understand the source of these triggers, you will continue to lose power in conversations, negotiations, relationships, and ambitions without knowing why. The world will keep pressing the same psychological buttons, and you will keep reacting the same predictable way. Cold mastery begins with noticing the gap between stimulus and reaction, noticing the part of you that tightens when someone challenges you, noticing the shame that rises when someone criticizes you, noticing the guilt you feel for simply taking up space. These sensations are not random. They are echoes of early power dynamics. When you were a child, you learned that certain emotions were dangerous to express. You learned that certain tones of voice signaled threat. You learned that certain facial expressions meant punishment was coming. And your nervous system absorbed these cues so deeply that even now, in adulthood, you respond as if you're still that small, defenseless version of yourself. This is the root of emotional manipulation. People don't control you through logic. They control you through the unresolved instincts buried in your nervous system. High-value psychological awareness reveals that emotional triggers are predictable patterns of vulnerability. Machiavelli would call them pressure points, places where a man's composure breaks, where his logic collapses, where his power dissolves. The dangerous thing is that most people wear their pressure points openly without realizing it. A slight flinch when someone raises their voice, a subtle shift in posture when tension appears, a softening of tone when facing rejection. The world reads these cues as clearly as ink on paper. Predators sense it instantly. Even well-meaning people take advantage of it without understanding why. You cannot rise in a competitive world while carrying vulnerabilities you refuse to confront. To break this pattern, you must practice emotional detachment, not as a performance, but as a psychological restructuring. When a trigger appears, you pause. You do not react. You observe the sensation with icy awareness. You name it internally. You trace it back to its origin. And then you choose your response instead of allowing the past to choose for you. This process turns your emotional triggers from weaknesses into data. Data becomes insight. Insight becomes control. Control becomes power that cannot be exploited. This is how a man becomes untouchable, not by avoiding his triggers, but by owning them so completely that no one else can use them. If you're ready to claim dominion over your inner reactions, comment this phrase: I control the trigger, not the other way around. There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes the world doesn't respond to who he thinks he is. It responds to the psychological patterns he broadcasts without knowing. This is where most people lose the game. They think their intentions matter. They think their goodness matters. They think their intelligence or kindness earns them respect. But respect is not given in response to intentions. Respect is given in response to emotional authority. And emotional authority is impossible if your childhood wounds are still speaking louder than your present logic. The world senses uncertainty long before it hears your words. It senses hesitation in your eyes, softness in your tone, instability in your posture. Everything you fail to control internally is announced externally. Dark psychology calls this unconscious signaling, and it is one of the most powerful forces shaping your success or your downfall. Childhood environments create a man's earliest emotional posture. If that environment trained you to be defensive, you will carry defensiveness like a scent. If it trained you to be submissive, you will carry it in your spine. If it trained you to expect disappointment, you will walk into opportunities already defeated. These internal signals shape how others treat you. People instinctively mirror the expectations you project. If you project fear, they dominate. If you project neediness, they use you. If you project uncertainty, they dismiss you. And you do all of this without speaking a single word. This is why emotional dominance is not about pretending to be strong. It's about rewiring the internal patterns that betray your weaknesses before you open your mouth. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote that rulers must appear unshakable, not because life is easy, but because perception governs power. In psychology, this is known as effective sovereignty, the ability to remain internally unmoved even when the world tries to provoke you. Most men fail here because their emotional core was shaped during a time in life when they had no protection. Their system learned to overreact. Their identity learned to anticipate threat. Their emotions learned to rise without permission. So now, as adults, they walk through life lacking authority over their own internal weather, and the world instinctively recognizes that lack of control. To break this pattern, you must cultivate an inner stillness, so cold and stable that your emotional energy becomes unreadable. This is not suppression. Suppression leaks. This is ownership. Ownership looks like feeling the old fear rise, but refusing to let it steer the wheel. Ownership looks like sensing the familiar impulse to explain yourself, but choosing silence instead. Ownership looks like hearing disrespect in someone's tone, but responding with a calmness so controlled it unsettles them. This is how emotional sovereignty is built, by replacing instinctive reactions with intentional responses until the world cannot predict you, provoke you, or push you off balance. And once your emotional core becomes untouchable, your presence changes. People stop testing you, they stop disrespecting you, they stop assuming they can influence your mood. You become the psychological center of gravity in every room, not because you speak loudly, but because you are no longer ruled by the ghosts of your past. If you're ready to step into this level of power, comment this: "My emotions answer to me now." There is a truth most men spend their entire lives avoiding. The people who shaped your childhood also shaped the way you submit. Submission isn't always physical. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's psychological, sometimes it's invisible, woven into your instincts so deeply you don't recognize it as submission at all. You obey outdated rules because the mind is wired to repeat what once ensured survival. If you learned early that staying quiet kept you safe, you still silence yourself. If you learned that being invisible reduced conflict, you still shrink in the presence of intensity. If you learned that pleasing others secured affection, you still overgive, overshare, and over-apologize. And as a result, the world exploits you with ease. Dark psychology calls this conditioned compliance, and it explains why adults who appear strong crumble instantly when certain emotional triggers appear. They are not weak. They are simply following old commands. The most chilling part is that people around you can sense this compliance on a subconscious level. Predators detect it, manipulators feed on it, even well-meaning people unconsciously take advantage of it. When you carry the energy of someone who was conditioned to submit, you attract dynamics where others dominate. They may not intend to, but human psychology is ruthless. Power flows to the one who appears less affected. And if your childhood trained you to internalize chaos, your nervous system will betray you every time it feels tension. Your voice gets softer, your thoughts race, your certainty fades. You aren't choosing submission, your body is reenacting a memory. This is why breaking these psychological patterns is not optional if you want sovereignty. You must become aware of the exact moments where your past tries to control your present. You must learn to feel the internal shift, the sensation of shrinking, the impulse to appease, the reflex to justify yourself, and you must refuse to indulge it. Awareness alone is not enough. Awareness must be paired with cold interruption. When the old instinct tells you to bend, you stand. When it tells you to apologize unnecessarily, you remain silent. When it tells you to chase reassurance, you withhold the impulse. Each refusal fractures the authority your childhood still holds over you. And slowly, the internal dynamic changes. You stop being ruled by fear and start being ruled by choice. As you do this, you will notice something shocking. People begin treating you differently without you ever asking. They sense the shift before you speak it. The subtle markers of submission disappear from your presence. Your tone becomes grounded. Your posture becomes deliberate. Your eyes become steady instead of searching. This change triggers a psychological recalibration in everyone around you. You no longer invite domination. You no longer broadcast vulnerability. You no longer carry the energy of someone who can be controlled emotionally. This is the moment when power begins to collect around you, because power gravitates to the self-governing. This transformation is not loud, not dramatic, and not chaotic. It is cold, internal, and irreversible. It is the process of becoming the man your childhood never allowed you to be, self-directed, self-defined, and immune to psychological influence. If you're ready to erase the last traces of childhood submission, comment this: I answer to no one but myself. At some point, you must confront a fact most men never admit. The world you see is filtered through the emotional distortions of your childhood. You are not reacting to reality. You are reacting to echoes of the past disguised as reality. This is why two people can face the exact same situation and experience two different worlds. You interpret disappointment as rejection because a younger version of you was rejected before he ever understood his worth. You interpret criticism as danger because early authority figures weaponized their words against you. You interpret silence as abandonment because the people you needed were emotionally unavailable. These distortions do not feel like distortions, they feel like truth. And that is what makes them so dangerous. When a man cannot distinguish between the past and the present, his decisions are predetermined. He moves through life blindfolded, guided not by intention but by unconscious psychological residue. Cold psychological clarity requires you to interrogate your perceptions ruthlessly. Every time you feel slighted, ask yourself if the threat is real or merely familiar. Every time you feel small, ask yourself if the conversation is actually diminishing you or if you are shrinking out of habit. Every time you feel intimidated, ask whether the person in front of you carries genuine authority or whether they simply activate an old wound. This level of introspection is uncomfortable because it strips away your excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances once you realize your interpretations are rooted in childhood conditioning. This is where true power begins. You don't gain control by dominating the world. You gain control by mastering the lens through which you view it. Dark psychology shows that people exploit perceptual distortions more than anything else. Manipulators don't need facts. They only need to trigger your old programming. They push the buttons that remind your nervous system of childhood helplessness. They recreate dynamics where you once lost. They speak in tones designed to evoke the emotional states you learned to fear. They rely on your inability to distinguish the past from the present. But once you decode the mechanics of your perception, manipulation collapses. What once felt like emotional truth becomes nothing more than an outdated reflex. And when your reflexes lose their power over you, the world loses its power to deceive you. Rewriting perception is not about positivity or delusion. It is about precision. It is about separating memory from reality, instinct from insight, fear from fact. When you learn to observe your emotions as signals rather than commands, you gain psychological accuracy. Accuracy gives you leverage, leverage gives you advantage, and advantage is the currency of every powerful individual in history. Machiavelli didn't teach men to be fearless, he taught them to be perceptive. A ruler who understands how perception shapes behavior cannot be manipulated by shadows. He sees the world as it is, not as his childhood taught him to fear it. When you reclaim your perception, you reclaim your future. The man you become is no longer scripted by the boy you once were. You rise above the distortions that kept you small and step into a version of yourself shaped by clarity, not conditioning. If you're ready to see reality without the fingerprints of your past, comment this: "My perception belongs to me alone." There comes a time when a man must understand that his greatest enemy is not the world, not fate, not circumstance, but the internal narrative he inherited before he had the strength to reject it. You walk through life carrying a story written by people who barely understood themselves. Your childhood did not just shape your reactions, it shaped the script you believe about your worth, your potential, your limits, your power, and as long as you operate inside that inherited script, you will sabotage your own progress every time you approach greatness. This is not a flaw, it is a psychological phenomenon known as identity inertia. You remain loyal to the version of yourself that once kept you safe, even when that version is now the anchor holding you underwater. Most men never rewrite their story because doing so feels like betrayal. Betrayal of their parents' expectations, betrayal of cultural programming, betrayal of the obedient child they once had to become. But the cold truth is this: the man you are destined to be demands the death of the story you were given. You cannot rise while clinging to an identity built for survival instead of dominance. Survival identities are built on fear, scarcity, caution, and emotional dependency. Dominant identities are built on clarity, autonomy, restraint, and internal authority. And these two versions of you cannot coexist. One must destroy the other. You must begin with radical self-narrative exposure. Pay attention to the sentences you quietly repeat in your mind. I'm not good enough. People don't listen to me. Power isn't for someone like me. These are not thoughts, they are inherited scripts. They are the psychological cages built during a time when you had no power to resist. And every time you accept them, you reinforce the chains that limit your reach in the adult world. Dark psychology teaches that your story determines your behavior long before your intentions do. If your story is small, your actions will be small. If your story is unworthy, your presence will be unworthy. If your story is passive, your energy will be passive, no matter how strong your ambition is. Rewriting the script begins with introducing psychological friction. When your mind whispers the old narrative, you do not obey it. You challenge it. You replace it. You treat it with the cold suspicion of a ruler interrogating a traitor. Is this belief mine, or was it implanted? Does this thought strengthen me, or weaken me? Does this story serve my future, or preserve my past? A man who questions his thoughts becomes a man who controls his destiny. A man who controls his destiny is dangerous in a world full of people controlled by their childhood scripts. As your internal story evolves, the world will respond differently to you. Your voice gains weight. Your decisions become final. Your posture carries authority. Your presence feels grounded instead of restless. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop explaining your worth. You stop bending your identity for anyone. This is what happens when a man rewrites the narrative that once ruled him. He becomes psychologically untouchable. If you're ready to author the story your childhood never granted you, comment this: "I write my destiny, not my past." There is a moment in a man's evolution when he realizes that power is not something he acquires from the world. It is something he retrieves from the parts of himself he abandoned in childhood. Every instinct you suppress, every boundary you fail to enforce, every truth you swallow, every emotion you silence, all of it traces back to a single psychological betrayal. At some point you learned that being yourself was unsafe, and so you split. You buried your authentic traits beneath compliant versions that ensured survival. You gave up anger to avoid punishment. You gave up confidence to avoid jealousy. You gave up ambition to avoid disappointment. You gave up strength because strength intimidated the very people you needed approval from. This internal abandonment creates a fracture that follows you into adulthood, and until you reclaim the pieces of yourself you exiled, you will always feel incomplete, no matter how disciplined, successful, or intelligent you become. Cold psychological truth demands that you confront the archetype you sacrificed. Maybe you abandoned your assertiveness. Maybe you abandoned your curiosity. Maybe you abandoned your defiance, your courage, your individuality, your dominance, your voice. These lost parts don't disappear. They sink into the unconscious, becoming shadow traits. And here is where dark psychology exposes the brutal paradox. The traits you reject in yourself become the traits you admire in others, envy in rivals, or fear in opponents. You project your suppressed qualities outward because your identity is too restricted to contain them. But the longer these shadow traits remain buried, the weaker your sense of self becomes. You walk through life hollow, predictable, restrained, an adult shaped around a childhood absence. Reclaiming this lost self is not a gentle process. It feels like aggression because you are breaking a psychological rule you have obeyed for decades. It feels like danger because your nervous system believes expressing your full identity will bring punishment. It feels like arrogance because you were trained to equate confidence with wrongdoing. But the moment you reintroduce the abandoned parts of your personality, you feel something awaken, a sharpness, a steadiness, a coldness, a sense of inner authority that was always meant to be yours. Integration is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming the man your past tried to prevent you from becoming. As you reclaim these traits, you will notice the world responding differently. People who once dominated you will sense the shift and become unsettled. People who depended on your submissiveness will feel threatened. People who only valued you when you were small will distance themselves. This is not loss, this is purification. Power does not attract the weak. It exposes them. And the stronger your integrated self becomes, the clearer your life path becomes. You stop drifting towards situations that drain you. You stop tolerating dynamics that diminish you. You stop seeking relationships that echo your childhood wounds. You step into alignment with a version of yourself that is no longer fragmented or apologetic. A man who reclaims his abandoned traits becomes psychologically sovereign. He no longer bends to appease, shrink to survive, or hide to be loved. He becomes whole, and wholeness is the foundation of undeniable power. If you're ready to retrieve the parts of yourself that were stolen by your past, comment this: I reclaim every part of me. There comes a final threshold every man must cross if he ever hopes to become untouchable. The point where he stops seeking permission to evolve. Childhood conditioned you to wait for approval, for validation, for someone to tell you you're allowed to step into your power. But adulthood is war, and war does not wait. The version of you who needed reassurance died a long time ago. Only the echoes remain. And now, in this moment, you stand at the edge of psychological sovereignty, one decision away from becoming the man your childhood never prepared you to face. This decision is internal, silent, absolute. You will no longer negotiate with the weaker versions of yourself. You will no longer bend to maintain comfort. You will no longer shrink to keep the peace. You will no longer dilute your presence to avoid unsettling others. Power demands transformation, and transformation demands the death of everything in you that was built for survival instead of dominance. The final stage of breaking childhood's control is accepting that you owe nothing to the boy you once were and everything to the man you are becoming. You do not need to heal him, you need to outgrow him. Healing is optional, evolution is mandatory. When you stop trying to fix your childhood and instead rise above it, you stop being reactive and start being strategic. You stop living through emotional memory and start living through intention. You stop fearing the world and start shaping it. This shift is what psychology calls identity transcendence, the moment your present self becomes stronger than every emotional imprint of your past. It feels cold, but coldness is clarity. It feels ruthless, but ruthlessness is necessary when you're cutting ties with the old self that kept you captive. As you step into this new identity, your energy changes permanently. Your presence becomes sharper, slower, more deliberate. You no longer rush to respond. You no longer scramble for approval. You no longer collapse under pressure. You operate from an internal authority so grounded that others sense it before you speak. Childhood once taught you to survive through compliance. Adulthood will teach you to thrive through self-command. And when your inner world aligns with power instead of fear, life bends in ways it never did before. Opportunities appear because you no longer sabotage them. People respect you because you no longer signal vulnerability. Boundaries form effortlessly because you no longer tolerate what insults your identity. You become the type of man who walks with calm inevitability, not because he is lucky, but because he is self-governed. This final step is not loud, it is not emotional, it is not dramatic. It is a quiet internal vow. You will never again allow your past to dictate your future. From this moment forward, every decision comes from strength, not survival. Every reaction comes from clarity, not conditioning. Every path you choose is defined by who you are, not who you were trained to be. This is psychological freedom. This is Machiavellian autonomy. This is cold self-mastery. If you're ready to seal this transformation permanently, comment this final phrase: "My future belongs only to me." And if this series reshaped something in you, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because your evolution is just beginning, and Machiavelli Psyche will take you the rest of the way.